They told us they could help us plant trees, but there would be no point in planting trees if they would be burned down.
For many, fire is a way of life. A burn might help clear trees for a field, or flush out animals for a hunt, or clear brush so it can grow back better. But fire is also a threat for nature, for the environment, but also for humans. And what happens when you want to make a change to a traditional way of life, all in the name of nature? This time and in this episode, people have the answer. Welcome to Nature Answers, rural stories from a changing planet. We explore stories of how communities in rural sub-Saharan Africa are working with nature to adapt to the climate crisis. I am your host, Martine Morgan. Today we are back in Ghana. Are you excited to travel with me? Shelanyili is located in Ghana's Guinean Savannah region, one of the hottest and driest areas in the country. The town is a warm, peaceful place. As you walk through it, you will notice that every house has a fully grown tree planted next to it. In fact, everywhere in Shelanyili, there are neem, chestnut, and acacia trees dotting the roads and intersections. The community is bathed in shade and cool areas near houses. Here, children play next to their exposed roofs. Others lounge beneath the sweeping tree cover. That's by design. Shelanyili's greenery sets it apart. The landscape here in northern Ghana is defined by smooth, rolling hills, dusty country roads, and sporadic clumps of forest. But outside of Shelanyili, among those trees and all around the fields of maize and soya beans are thick concentrations of bushes. Ah yes, that's the real meaning of a green pasture. Imagine towering trees dotting the landscape, surrounded by bushes so thick that you can't see through them. But it wasn't always this way.
Baba Salifu.
This is Baba Salifu speaking Tui. He has lived in the community for nearly his entire life. He is a living library. In that time, vast changes have come to his home. Droughts have become longer, floods are more common, and the windstorms tearing across the savannah are now much stronger. With little tree cover, those winds will wreak havoc on the town. These changes, brought on by climate change, were a crisis.
There was a hard wind that came in and was able to pick almost all the roofing off the houses in this town. So because of that, we were forced to sleep in the same room with the children, our wives, and our siblings.
Shelanyili needed more trees, but there was a problem. Shelanyili's trees and brush were constantly burnt away by bushfires set by hunters. Baba Salifu remembers how frequent these bushfires had become.
A whole lot of people from neighboring communities would come to burn the bush. Then people within Shelanyili would be burning the bush all the time.
Farm yields around Shelanyili were also impacted. Ayi Abdulai was a young farmer at the time. She remembers how hard farming had become.
Before the bushfire ban, there were a lot of challenges. You could harvest your products, but then the bush burnings would burn them.
The burnt on the brush, once a magnet for local animals, no longer attracted them. People have set bushfires for hunting and farming purposes for generations. It is not an uncommon or always negative practice, But bushfires don't have the same effect on the environment as they once did. The climate has definitely changed in Shelanyili. Rainy seasons are wetter. This has helped the underbrush to grow denser. This means that fires, when set, are hotter and more difficult to control. The ecological balance that allowed them has been thrown off, and the scenario is similar around the world. It's not just only the case of Shelanyili. Esther Ekua Amoako is a lecturer at the University for Development Studies in Ghana. She's been studying bushfires for decades.
People set bushfires for different reasons. That's to prepare the land for cultivation. And it saves a lot of labor, like going to get people to weed. And people would burn, or they would use fire for hunting. You would find boys or young men who would burn a whole area to get some rats for food or for protein.
Ghanaians also have a cultural attachment to bushfires.
It's become part of us, become part of our systems and our culture that we don't see anything wrong.
But now, rural communities are launching reforestation projects, and as they are doing so, they are running into problems.
You're going to plant the trees, and the next moment there's bushfires that are not controlled, and then they just get everything off. So one thing that NGOs are doing is to educate communities on how to control bush burning and even, indiscriminate burning.
That was Shelanyili's experience. Here is Baba again.
They
told us they could help us plant trees, but there would be no point in planting trees if they would be burned down. So before that, we needed to stop burning bush.
At the time, 25 years ago, burning bushfires was virtually unprecedented. Still, Shelanyili went ahead. They were alone in taking the government's advice. At first, the ban went smoothly.
The neighboring communities' chiefs were informed that this is what we are going to do in our community. So we want to give you awareness so that you can talk to your people, especially your youth. The chiefs agreed and said that they would talk to their people.
Karaga is a community next door to Shelanyili. It's about 7 kilometers away. Some people there were not happy about the burn bans. Losing bushfires as a hunting tool was a real hardship, one that impacted them in real ways that their leaders, better resourced, couldn't relate to. It didn't matter that the chief of Karaga had given his blessing to Shelanyili's decision. He didn't enforce it, and so the bush continued to burn. This culminated in threats, physical showdowns, and even violence. Neighboring communities accused Shelanyili of selling part of its land to the government. This inflamed tensions further. Considering the situation, Shelanyili had to set up a volunteer fire brigade to patrol the area. That soon led to a cycle of physical confrontations.
Whenever they came to burn the bush and our community members came out to meet them, they would threaten us that if we didn't go back, they would beat us.
One day, when the men of Shelanyili were attending a funeral, young men from Karaga took advantage of their absence to start another bushfire. The women of Shelanyili responded this time. Ayi Abdulai remembers joining in.
Me and the other women came out with water to put out the fire, and the youth said to us, "You can't stop us, and if you do go back, you shouldn't mention our names."
Soon, Women from the community were scared to even visit Karaga due to the animosity between the two communities, and still the fires burned. Finally, the tension broke out into real violence. When the people of Shelanyili were away, people of Karaga came to burn the bush. Baba Salifu says he was patrolling alone that day and confronted them.
There was a physical confrontation. I was the only one there to stop them. And in the course of stopping them, they beat me mercilessly.
When the men finally left Salifu, he was brought to the hospital, ironically in Karaga. Baba Salifu can still point to the scar on his head more than 25 years later. This uneasy dynamic continued for years, but then something happened. Karaga experienced exactly what Shelanyili was trying to prevent. A massive fire broke out. Originally, it began near Shelanyili, set by a young hunter from Karaga. The fire soon spread to the outskirts of Karaga itself. Scores of farms and ranches were caught in it, killing many animals. Ibrahim Nassan is from Karaga. He led hunting parties during the conflict. He says he was always in favor of the fire ban, but he admits that some of his boys would disobey him and start fires. He was in Karaga when the major fire occurred.
The bushfire affected people in Karaga and damaged our electricity poles. We lost power, and people from Karaga saw their farms burned. We had to intervene ourselves to put out the fire, but it was so big that we had to run away.
When the flames died down, the chief of Karaga convened a meeting with everyone from both communities. As traditional authority, he put his foot down and said there will be no more fires set in Shelanyili. He banned the young hunter who started the fire from hunting with Ibrahim's party. Ibrahim was devastated that one of his own boys was the one that started the big fire.
After I realized it was one of my boys who started the fire, I resigned as hunting leader.
His resignation brought the conflict to an end. Karaga, once fractured over the ban and unwilling to punish its wayward youth, came together and abided by it. It is somewhat depressing that what brought the two communities together was this fire, but it's perhaps a familiar feeling. When Karaga felt the bite of climate change themselves, they knew they had to make a change. 25 years later, Shelanyili is thriving. Ayi Abdulai, who still tends to her farm, can recount the benefits easily.
I have benefited from better use, which I've used to support my children. Some of them are getting driver's licenses. We can also produce shea nuts.
Once fearful of conflict with Karaga, now she feels hopeful.
I believe that the land that loses its soil fertility will regain it, and we will farm on it to get more yields to support ourselves and our children. We feel so proud. What makes us happy is that some of the neighboring communities who were challenging us are now requesting for us to train them on how to fight fire.
While the tensions have ceased, communities are still reluctant to ban bushfires outright. 25 years later, even Karaga has not adopted a bushfire ban of its own. But reflecting on the experience in a radio station in Karaga, Ibrahim Nassan has changed.
I'm growing old now. Whatever will be good for the people is what I stand for. If Karaga came out with a decision to ban bush burning, and ask me to lead the group that patrols the area, I will do it as a leader.
Shelanyile's story is one that may resonate with many people around the world. Despite tradition, habits, and old practices, they made sacrifices in order to adapt to climate change. But when their neighbors refused to do the same, it led to conflict. Shelanyili did it anyway. But it took facing the problem itself for their neighbors to come around to a peaceful resolution. There are lessons we can all take from Shelanyili's story. How can we support our neighbors and our friends when they take the lead in tackling climate change? How can we, despite conflict, stay steadfast in our resolution to find a solution? And lastly, how can we work together to create a better world? This is Nature Answers, Rural Stories from a Changing Planet. This was our last episode of the season. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the stories we shared from Uganda and Ghana this year. We are so excited to share the stories of communities who are working with nature to adapt to climate change. But this is not the end. Stay tuned to our feed for some goodies over the next little while. I want to take this opportunity to announce to you that some French episode of this podcast will be out very, very soon. We are also already at work for the next season, because in the next few weeks, our next batch of interns from Carleton University School of Journalism and Communications will be headed to Ghana and Uganda, as well as Zambia and Cote d'Ivoire, to learn about and share more stories. If there's something more you want to hear about, drop us a line at natureanswers@farmradio.org. Until our next season is released, you can stay in touch by visiting our website farmradio.org/natureanswers. There you can learn more about nature-based solutions and the people implementing them. On this episode's page, you can find pictures of Shelanyili and the people we interviewed, as well as transcripts and more stories. Follow us on social media at Farm Radio, and it's not too late to share Nature Answers with your friends and family. We'd love to spread the word. It's been a pleasure spending time with you this year. Let's keep in touch for something else and maybe for something great. I'm Martin Morgan, coming to you from Yaoundé, Cameroon.
Hi, I'm Christian Robiard, and I'm the Audience Development Specialist with Nature Answers. This episode was written and produced in Ghana by Christopher Edwards, with help from staff from Farm Radio International's office in Accra, Ghana. The sounds were recorded on location by Christopher Edwards, El Manuel Backlin, and Morgana Adby. They joined as part of an internship program with Carleton University's School of Journalism. The translations were voiced by Rosetta Atiso and Randolph Anane. It was edited by Tara Sprickerhoff. Farm Radio compensated community members who participated in interviews. It is common practice to compensate a person in this region for the time they spend being interviewed. Our podcast would exclude many important perspectives if we only interviewed those who could afford to step away from their economic activities without compensation. Nature Answers was produced thanks to funding from the Government of Canada.